So for this week on Cyber School, after our long winter vacation, we're coming back to start kind of a new series that we're going to talk about. Since I've gone through at length talking about our products and how they apply and how to use them, we're going to talk about different platforms and how to use the products on a particular platform and any particular settings or requirements that a particular platform will have to be able to get a product to work on said platform. So today we're going to talk about Zoom. It's a pretty commonly requested platform that we get questions about because they're a little bit more complicated than some other platforms in terms of setup. They have some distinct requirements. So I figured they would be a good platform to talk about as we kind of go into this new education thing that we're going to talk about on Cyber School. So, of course, when we're dealing with Zoom, unlike a lot of other platforms where it's just, does it do SIP? Then, okay, it works. Zoom has a little bit more requirements. And the three main requirements that they have are really going to be security focused because while Zoom has had some potential issues, during the start of COVID, when there were the news stories about, crashing Zoom meetings and stuff, not really a fault of Zoom. It's just because people didn't use the tools that Zoom had to properly secure their meetings. But Zoom is really focused on security, albeit whatever news you might hear or, see. As somebody that works with Zoom frequently and with a lot of their back-end engineers, the platform is very secure and it's built with security in mind. So two of the distinct device requirements that are going to be super important for any devices working on Zoom are going to be TLS 1.2, which is also known as Transport Layer Security, and 1.2 is just the particular version. And what that does is that encrypts the actual SIP traffic between something like, say, our intercom and the person that's going to be receiving the call from that intercom. So that way, who the intercom is calling is going to be all encrypted. But frankly, the important bit of that actual call, the audio, needs to be encrypted as well. And that's where SRTP comes in. And that's Secure Real-Time Protocol, which is just what's used to actually send the audio traffic from point A to point B, from the intercom to the caller receiving the call. So that way, with TLS 1.2 and SRTP, that means everything is encrypted call-wise. The setup for the call, who's actually being called, and then what's talked about in the call, frankly, the important bit, is going to be encrypted. And there's one other thing that Zoom has relatively recently added in about the last 6 months or so. They added in a requirement for most devices to be auto-provisioned. And what that does is that basically just gets the server to verify the device that's trying to work on the particular platform, that they are the device that was configured and actually allows it to work. So it makes it a little bit more secure for the device setup because you don't just get a web page that has all the credentials on there. Everything is handled between Zoom and the device, and nothing would be customer facing. But it also ends up benefiting the customer, not just in additional security, but it also just makes the setup process a little bit easier. Instead of having to follow one of my guides and go through and set everything up, you copy and paste a link, you check a box, you reboot the device, and it just works. It's a lot easier to work with and just makes the platform a lot more secure and easy to work with as we go through. So one note, though, is it does require a client certificate, and that's something we'll cover momentarily. But before we get into talking about a client certificate, I want to just talk about the specific device type that we recommend using CyberData devices as on Zoom. And that's known as a common area phone. When you're using any kind of, say, like regular Zoom user ID, they assume that it's going to be associated with an email. For example, your company switches over to Zoom and they sign everybody up with their email. And that gives them the capability to go and create Zoom meetings as a user and do all the fun, cool stuff that you get with a Zoom account with a regular UCaaS provider. Well, when you're setting up, say, 10 speakers or like 12 intercoms, you're not really going to have a distinct email for every single one of those devices. And that's where a common area phone comes in. Common area phones are designed for phones that anybody can use. They're not really designed for, say, a distinct user, say John's phone or Alan's phone. It's just a lobby phone or a phone literally in a common area, place that, say you're in a lobby in a hotel and you need to call somebody, you need to call the front desk, you're calling and ordering a pizza, what have you. It's those kind of phones where it's not going to be associated with a distinct user. And because it's not associated with a distinct user, it doesn't require an email address to actually create that extension, which is really advantageous for our devices. Because, if you're setting up, say, 10 speakers or 12 intercoms, that'd be kind of a pain to go to, your network admin and have them create a whole bunch of unique email addresses that really aren't going to be used, which could potentially eat up some licenses and Outlook and all that hullabaloo. Plus, one of the other downsides of using a regular user device over setting it up as we recommend as a common area phone. Common area phones are kind of limited in what they can do on the Zoom platform. So as long as you keep paying your regular bill, there's no additional fees or charges that you're going to get hit with by using a common area phone. Of course, you're still going to be paying for your regular user licenses, everybody else there. But by adding in, say, a CyberData intercom, there's no additional fees. As long as you keep paying that monthly bill, that intercom's going to keep working, which makes it really advantageous and different compared to other platforms that would normally charge for a product, even if it's only being used for internal calls. And the nice thing is, they're not making you jump through a whole bunch of additional hoops. Okay, so it's free. You got to, specify X, Y, Z to be able to go and set up one of these devices. It's very, very simple. You set the name, you pick whatever extension number you want, you plug in the MAC address, and you're basically on your way to setting up the equipment. So it's really easy to use, and it's very good to use on the particular platform. So next, let's talk about auto provisioning, which is something that Zoom recently changed and is a big part of the Zoom setup going forward. So Zoom now requires most devices, and that would be your regular desk phone to any CyberData equipment, to be auto-provisioned instead of manual configuration. Again, this is kind of a security-based thing, so that way you're not having, say, if somebody's got a keylogger or some way to remotely view your screen without you knowing, to potentially leak that sensitive account information and do toll fraud on your account. Everything's going to be handled between the individual device and the server itself, so that way it doesn't take any user input. It's easier for you and more secure, which is really the big selling point for this. It makes installation much, much easier. But one of the things that is required because of this is Zoom basically needs to verify, is the device that's trying to get this credential actually the device that it says it is? And that's done with a client certificate. And without going into a whole hour-long dissertation about client certificate and certificate exchange and all that kind of stuff, I'd bore you, I'd put everybody to sleep that isn't already. Basically, what's important there is it's just a certificate that is on the device that has a common name that's going to be the MAC address of the device, and that's just the hardware address of the particular device. So that way, Zoom says, "Hey, prove you are who you say you are," and the device provides the certificate that says, "I am this MAC address," and Zoom checks their records. "Oh yeah, we're looking for that MAC address. Here's your credentials." This becomes a problem when dealing with some older CyberData devices and some currently sold CyberData devices, because their client certificate that all the devices are set with don't have their common name set to that particular MAC address. For some of our older products, definitely some older stuff that we're not selling, and unfortunately some stuff that we are currently selling, we didn't really design our common certificates to be signed with our MAC address. They're assigned as basically a common CyberData device. So, of course, that doesn't match the MAC address that Zoom is looking for, so Zoom rightly rejects it, which is, of course, checking the security. It's doing what it's supposed to do. The MAC address doesn't match from the common name to what Zoom has. They reject it. Everything is functioning as intended. But you still want these older devices to work, or some of these, new fancy speakers that you just bought from CyberData. You still want those things to work on Zoom. And where that comes in is they'll have to be manually configured as a generic SIP device. And this is going to require the actual Zoom account rep, so the actual person at Zoom that you're working with, to enable what they call other/generic SIP device profile. And depending on who you talk to in your account rep, sometimes this can just be, "Hey, please enable the setting on there." Wing, bang, boom, done. It happens in like an hour. They might ask you to fill out some paperwork. It really depends on who you talk to. But it's a very easy process to go through. You just have to make that a request to your Zoom account rep, and they can help you through that particular process to be able to use some of these older legacy style CyberData products on there. So when we talk about Zoom setup, of course, the common area phone is going to be the best type that you're going to want to use. And again, just to kind of rehash, some of the other types that are available are going to require an email for a user. So they're not really good to go and use our products for. But as you're going and creating the common area phone, there's a couple different fields that you're going to want to fill out. So the first field, and frankly the most important field, is going to be the display name for that particular common area phone that you're creating. And this relates to the caller ID field that'll show up on whoever's actually receiving the call from this particular device. Not super duper important for something like, say, a speaker or a paging adapter, because you're going to be calling that. But if you've got something like one of our intercoms that will be calling you, you want to know exactly where that device is. So we would recommend in situations like that, say you've got a front door intercom, you set the display name for that as front door intercom. So that way, when you get a call from it, you know that it's from the front door intercom. And then you've also got a description field, which doesn't appear in anything as you get a call, but it's really useful for maybe yourself a couple years down the line or somebody else that takes over your position to know exactly where that particular device is. So we recommend setting your description as a location for that particular device. And just kind of talking about that intercom, yeah, we said front door intercom, but maybe you have a couple different intercoms, and maybe there are a couple doors that might be considered a front door. So that way you could say front door east wing, front door west wing, what have you, just to be able to differentiate in the future if you ever need to do any maintenance on a particular device. Next, the extension number, that's really up to you. You can set the extension number as however you like based on your dialing pattern. Can be 3 digits, can be 4, 5, 6, whatever you want. That really has no impact on it. And the last thing that's going to be required during setup is, of course, the MAC address of the device that's going to be used by this particular extension. Whether or not you're going for the provisioning route, it's absolutely required for the provisioning route, the auto provisioning. But if you're going to go for the other generic style setup, you're also going to need the MAC address, just because Zoom likes to have all of those records. It's just good to have. So that's just some of the stuff that you'll need to know as you go through the actual setup process. So again, let's just talk a little bit more about this device certificate. So the device certificate, as I mentioned, shown with an image here, and this is from the SSL tab of an intercom, just lists, of course, where the device was made, the company that made it, us CyberData, and then the common name you see there is, of course, the MAC address of this particular device. And then we've got our not before and not after times, and that's just the times that the certificate is valid. It's valid starting on October 29th of 2019 and is valid for about 10 years. So, oh no, it would be 10 years accounting for leap years. So it would go until October 26th of 2029. Hopefully that intercom will last that long, assuming they install it properly. So Zoom just uses this to go and actually identify the device as it's going and syncing up with Zoom. This is created by CyberData during the manufacturing process. When we're taking that raw circuit board and actually putting all of the code on there, this certificate is generated on the fly. Some of our devices, and this is something that we're adding on all of our newer devices as we go forward, because we get a lot of requests for people that want to change their device certificate. Some of our models and more models going forward are going to allow custom device certificate upload, which will allow you the capability, say, you can change your organization name, really useful for kind of bigger enterprise customers and some of our government contracts that want to be able to go and change some of the fields in there to be very specific for their network as they have those requirements. But frankly, the most important bit besides the time that the certificate is valid is going to be the common name on there. And that's how most platforms will use to identify and verify the device that's providing the certificate. And the common name must, and must is the most important word here, be the MAC address of the device that is registered with Zoom to actually work. If one character doesn't match, say, instead those last 2 digits we have there, 3-1, say you mistype and you punch in 3-2, Zoom is going to reject that every single time because the common name in the certificate does not match what Zoom has on their side, and they're going to rightly reject it. So that's the most important bit, and this is just kind of the device certificate and a little bit more explanation. So next, let's talk about the actual setup process. So now we went through and we talked about creating the extension, all that good stuff. How do you go and set up one of the CyberData devices? So when you're dealing with the auto provisioning route, it's absolutely trivial to go and set up one of these devices with the change to do the automatic provisioning. So the first thing you're going to want to do, and This is basically very bare bones, especially for a lot of our newer products that have NTP enabled by default. You just want to make sure that it's set for the right time zone. Of course, all of our products are manufactured in Monterey, California, so they're going to be set to the Pacific Standard Time. But if you're on the East Coast, there's, of course, a time difference. So you might want to correct that. That's really just for your records. It's still going to work with Zoom. They're not going to be able to identify, oh, this is supposed to be the East Coast. The time doesn't match. We're going to reject it. It's all for system time, but you just want to verify that it's there just in case time ever becomes important in the future. Then after you've gone through and you've created the actual extension on Zoom, they're going to give you a URL to go and post into our device. And they have some nice little instructions that tell you what tab to go to, but you're just going to want to copy that URL and then paste it into the auto provisioning server field on the AutoProv tab. And it's just, you just want to copy and paste that field in there. You don't need to set a file name. You don't need to adjust many of the other settings, but you do need to check the box to verify server certificate. And what that does is this has our device initiate that handshake to say, hey, server that I'm connecting to, are you actually Zoom? And Zoom sends us a server certificate that we can verify, and we can say, hey, yeah, cool, this is actually Zoom. And Zoom's going to then say, hey, can you give me your certificate? I want to check that you are you. And that's how that handshake works. So you want to make sure you check that box. If you don't check that box to verify server certificate, it's not going to provision. And then finally, all you got to do is, of course, save your settings and then reboot the device, and it's going to auto provision. It's going to grab its configuration file, and assuming everything worked properly, it's just going to be ready to use on the platform. It's really, really cool and very automated to go through this process. So let's talk about device setup. So after it goes and it handles all of the provisioning stuff, it's going to set up all of the basic stuff, meaning everything that basically relates to Zoom. The SIP setup. That's all it's going to do. Any other features, things like, say, your intercom dial out, your paging server page groups, your audio files, your network settings, your sensor settings, what have you, none of that is going to be automatically set up by Zoom. You still have to do all that. So for something like an intercom, you want to go and set out that intercom dial out. You want to adjust your relay settings, your paging server. You got to upload any audio files you need, and you need to adjust your page groups accordingly. So just keep in mind, just doing the auto provisioning is going to make it so you can receive calls at the box, but you won't be able to make outbound calls because you still have to set all of that portion up on the CyberData side. There we go. So now for Zoom setup, and we're not doing provisioning. Now, of course, as I mentioned, there are some currently sold products that we're selling today, and we're going to be selling tomorrow and for a little bit longer, as well as some of the older products. You know, products that you might have gotten, say, 4 or 5 years ago that are still working strong, support TLS 1.2, they support SRTP, but they've got that issue with their device certificate and the common name. So what you can do is, of course, you're just going to have to reach out to Zoom and have them enable that other or generic style SIP device, of course, that has to be done by your Zoom account manager. You can't do this. They have to do it on the back end. But then after you go through and get that enabled, you're going to do the same style of configuration of the device where you're going to create that common name or that common area profile. You're going to go and set up all of the different things for that particular extension, and then you're just going to manually configure the device. And we've still got all of our documents that actually go through that process. So if you're unsure on how to do that, we've still got all of our documentation that'll walk through that manual configuration process. So now that we've gone through all of the different setup options, let's talk about some helpful tips that can be useful if you run into issues and you're trying to troubleshoot. So the most important feature in either doing TLS connection or doing auto provisioning is going to be one of the tabs on the CyberData web interface, what we call the SSL tab. And this tab, of course, is going to have that device certificate that we've been talking about at length, but it's also going to be where the device stores all of its CA certificates. And again, without getting into a long explanation for that, that's how we verify Zoom that is Zoom. That's where all these different certificates are in there. But we've got a couple different buttons that are useful for setup on Zoom, and that's going to be verify SIP connection and verify AutoProv connection. And what that does is with either the SIP connection or the AutoProv connection, the device is going to attempt to initiate a connection to Zoom or any other platform for that matter to verify either connection, depending on what button you press. And it's going to go through that handshake process. So if a test connection fails, it might tell you something like, hey, you didn't enable NTP, and that'll tell you why, because it can't verify the time on the certificate, because our devices all think, unless NTP is running, that it's 1985, and it's not 1985. So that's going to be really helpful. And say, for example, you're missing a certificate. It goes through parts of the handshake, and then it'll say, I cannot verify this particular server because, say, you're missing a certificate from Zoom or some other platform. It'll tell you right there. So that's an easy way just to make sure that everything is set up on the CyberData side. But then Zoom can also help you understand if everything was done properly. So one nice feature that they added in with the auto provisioning setup, after you get that URL to go and plug into our device, you do that, you reboot, there's actually a check button in the little pop-up that you get on the Zoom side because Zoom is hosting the file and they can tell if they allowed anybody to download the file. So you can actually tell in the pop-up, hey, download was successful, or boo, download was unsuccessful. And that way you can have a great idea from both sides. You can check our side and you can check Zoom sides. But then after all that's done, you can also check the online versus offline status on the Zoom page, which will tell you right there, heads up in your devices list, okay, hey, my intercom went offline. What's going on with that? So that can be another tip just to verify that. But we also show a registration status on our home tab. So there's lots of different ways to go and check that your device is, one, connecting to Zoom properly, but also staying registered. And you can check that both on our end and on the Zoom side. So finally, just in summary, most of our CyberData devices, basically just about everything you can get today, with a very few exceptions, are going to work and be compatible with Zoom. They're, of course, going to have to support, they must support TLS 1.2 and SRTP to function. Devices can also be auto-provisioned. That's actually how Zoom prefers it. If it can be auto-provisioned, it should be, but you can do manual configuration if you have to. You'll just have to work with your account rep to get all of that stuff set up. And with that said, manual setup is still really easy. That was how they did it before everything was provisioned. So just by going through manual setup, it's a little bit of a pain to have to go and get that enabled, but after that's done, setup is still very, very easy. And just one thing to keep in mind, Zoom has had some bad press out there. They're an awesome platform. I really do have to say, out of all the platforms that we work with, they are one that is always improving, and they're really focusing on improving security. They are really, really security focused, and honestly beat out a lot of other platforms that are very big in terms of security. Zoom is very good with that aspect. So finally, just to cover a couple terms that we use today that I didn't really talk about at length, we've of course got a MAC address, which is defined as a media access control address, and that's basically just your network port. So it'll be different from, say, your iPhone to your desktop computer to your CyberData device, what have you, and that's just a hardware identifier for that particular device. TLS is just transport layer security, and that's going to be used in the actual SIP transactions, actually, setting up a call. SRTP is secure real-time transport protocol. And what that does is that just secures actually sending the audio from point A to point B. And then finally, NTP is network time protocol, and that's how your device knows what time it is.
Thank you for watching this edition of Cyber School. If you have any questions, please get in contact with our sales department. They are available by email at sales@cyberdata.net or by phone at 831-373-2601 extension 334. Please make sure to like this video and subscribe for more content like this from CyberData.